Good morning, everybody. It's late morning, but it's still morning nonetheless. Hope everybody is well. We're going to get started in just another couple of minutes. All right, we're going to give it one more minute, you all, and get started at 11:05, which is almost that time. Good morning again. All right, everybody. Good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started. The time is now 11:06. Looks like we got almost everybody that registered for this first session. We are recording right now as well. As you all have already figured out and seen before we sort of jump in to the official welcome, there are a number of ways to communicate to myself as well as the group. And that is, number one, there is a question and answer box that will allow everyone to be able to both ask questions, as you can ask those privately, or so those questions can be seen from the entire group. Or there is also a chat box, right, which will allow individuals to chat directly again with the group or to panelists as well. So let's see, somebody has already started to raise their hand. Can everybody hear me as well? You could type in the chat box. Can everybody hear me? All right, let me see. Someone is raising their hand. Let's see. Okay, perfect. Everybody says loud and clear. So of course, this is part of the really an adaptation in the age of COVID, right? Is getting familiar with all of this technology, et cetera. So this is the fun part. I saw somebody raise their hand, but I'm not really sure how to call on somebody after they raise their hand. So we're gonna figure that out along the way. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm playing in the chat box instead of focusing on this information. And as you all saw on the flyer, that's sort of the first piece of housekeeping, is that this info session is definitely not going to last until 2 p.m. As was the typo on the flyer. Our objective is to get done with this well before 12 noon, as well as to be able to get as many answers to you all's questions as humanly possible in that allotted time. Once again, this conversation will be recorded, and we look forward to, again, all of the questions, comments, and feedback that's sure to come. So again, now I just want to take the opportunity to welcome everyone to this really first of its kind. This is the first time ever that we've sort of produced this Moving Towards Liberation experience. We don't really want to call it an experiment per se, but certainly this is a pilot. This is the first of its kind. And we're going to explain exactly how this all came about and why we're so excited about this opportunity. But all in all, the purpose today is to give everyone an overview of exactly what the Moving Towards Liberation cohort experience is all about. Again, how it came to be, what our objectives are, so on and so forth. And again, allow me to introduce myself for those that I'm not familiar with, who are on the line. My name is Sadiq Ali, and I'm the proud Executive Director of Maryland Mentor. And our mission is to increase the quality and quantity of mentoring relationships and experiences, and to close the mentoring gap. And in doing so, we provide training, support, and a variety of resources to the hundreds of different mentoring programs and youth-serving organizations across the state. And this morning, I am joined by my co-host, which is Ms. Zara Kadu, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself before we jump into the agenda.
Thank you so much, Sadiq. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Zara Kadu, and I'm the director of Both And, which is a collective of racial justice educators and trainers. And I'm really, really excited to be here with all of you. I worked in youth development in Baltimore for 10 years and 3 years in Poughkeepsie, New York before that, as well as in mentoring specifically. So excited to get into it.
Awesome, awesome. We have a number of other, so I'm trying to promote somebody to be able to speak here. So we have a couple of our other Moving Towards Liberation Design team members that are on the line. I'm gonna ask them to raise their hand. Let's see here. I wanna call Andre, but it looks like he's using an older version of Zoom. I ain't calling out my man Dre, but I'm going to try to come back to Dre here in a second. But there are a couple of our other MTL design team members that are on the line here, and we'll allow them to jump in there as time permits. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in here, ladies and gentlemen. So our agenda for the next several minutes is as follows. So, why exactly sort of did this Moving Liberation experience come about? How did it come about? So on and so forth. We also want to be able to hear because again, we all sort of know and have been increasingly so over these last couple of days, right? In a mind-numbingly number or amount of webinars and conference calls, oh my God, but we want to try to make this as interactive as we can, and that is hearing from you all. What attracted you all to this situation? Why are you here? So we're going to jump into that a little bit. And then we're going to handle really an overview of the Moving Towards Liberation experience. What is it all about? We'll talk objectives. We'll also speak a little bit about the design team. As you saw, there was a couple of logos there on the opening slide, which really sort of point to some of the members that are on the team. Then we'll talk a little bit about the cohort features and what exactly is the experience that we're looking to sort of to create for those cohort participants. We'll take some questions and then we'll talk some next steps. So pretty straightforward. Again, our objective is to be done absolutely by noon and not by 2 p.m. I just want to say that again. And again, I just want to note that you are absolutely encouraged to either type any questions or comments in the chat box, or again, you can utilize the Q&A option, and you can send those questions and make those either public, or you can make those private and just address myself and the other panelists. So again, we're gonna jump right in. So our first question, and again, we offer you those same options. We'd love for you to actually type this right in the chat box. But what exactly brought you here? What excited you? What attracted you to the potential participation in this experience? And more practically, for the purposes of our time in this information session, what questions do you want to make sure that we address as your presenters this morning? What questions would you like us to address for sure? And please, we would encourage you to type this in the chat box. Nice, nice. So from Renee, she had the opportunity to attend the training with Zara before, and that experience absolutely was enough to draw her here this morning to learn more about this opportunity. Thank you so much, Renee. Anybody else? What brought you here this morning? Nice, nice. So we will cover that. As it stands right now, that's an easy one. There's no cost right now. There's no cost right now. To learn more and see whether it's a good fit with her particular role, this is from Sharon. To learn more, please let me know if you don't want me to share this, because that was actually just a panelist. So I will just keep them anonymous from here on out. But to learn more and see whether it's a good fit for this person's role and work in their projects. Another comment is this person is not a Baltimore-based organization, but work for actually another one of our mentor affiliate partners, and very interested to learn exactly what we're doing and what we're a part of down here. Someone else noted that the opportunity to build capacity within their organization is particularly appealing. Oh, Sharon said, feel free to share. Thank you, Sharon. And we have another participant who is participating in another piece of Zara's work and is absolutely invested in furthering her work for the organization that she works with and also growing personally. These are all awesome. Oh, thank you so much, Jake. So Jake noted he's gone through trainings with myself and Maryland Mentor, and has been looking for an opportunity to focus on race and equity for his organization. And he's a big fan of some of the organizations that are participating in the design, including Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. So again, super excited to participate. Thank you so much, Jake. So as we see, there are a number of really, really awesome thoughts so far from folks that have joined us this morning. I really, really appreciate everybody for sharing. Zara, anything else to note?
No, it just makes me really excited to hear what brings people here.
Awesome. Please keep those thoughts and questions and comments coming again via the chat box, as well as the Q&A function as well. So why moving towards liberation? Really our first piece of the presentation. I think everyone on the call right now who has joined us this morning can agree in one shape, form, or fashion that there are a couple issues in the youth development and mentoring space, but particularly what brought us together is one particular issue in the youth development and mentoring space.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that many programs have been built upon the following. And Zara, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. So within the organizing team, we've spoken a lot about how a lot of youth development mentoring programs are built on notions of Black inferiority and Black pathology, the idea of Black folks being broken or needing to be fixed. And so that brings us to this idea that youth are issues to be solved, and that Black communities and Black families are impediments. And that really sets the stage for Eurocentric models of development that are colonial in nature, as well as notions that assimilation, that is, if you just act like me, if you just assimilate into dominant culture, you'll survive. That is typically what we are peddling in the youth development space. And that really, all of this rests on a foundation of white supremacy and racism that needs to be named and needs to be examined. Sadiq?
Thank you so much, Zara. And I would just note that, especially this idea of assimilation, as it pertains to mentoring and youth development programs, not only do we see it as many, many times in program culture, not only do we see it as a key to survival, but also as a sign of and as a key to success. And again, this is a very, very problematic paradigm. It's a very, very problematic, sort of ideology that for a really, really long time has been prevalent, especially in the idea of mentoring in one-to-one situations, especially when we talk about programs that, really don't look at matching from a racial standpoint, right? And look at the benefits. We try to look at it from the benefits of, diverse matches and learning from one another, which is very, very important. But as we get down to the nitty gritty, what sort of ideology and methodology do our mentors, right, proceeding in the mentoring relationship with? And we find that when we dig deep, that it is based on assimilation and is based on sort of respectability politics, and not really, again, rooted in notions that that young people have everything that they need already.
Yeah, and Sadiq, can I just add, because I realized that I didn't name my race at the top, that I'm a white woman. So when I said in terms of notions of assimilation, if Black youth can just be like us, what I meant was us white people. So just wanted to make sure that gets named.
Thank you so much. But in spite of all of that, we sincerely believe that program leaders, organizational leaders, that when presented with viable alternatives and in conjunction with community, resource partners and staff that are armed with alternative methodologies, right? So an idea that if I knew a better way, I would carry my program in a different way. I would look through a different lens. If I had a different lens, if I had the language, that again, organizations can and will do better when presented with these alternatives. And that's really I want to say the foundational concept, because, there's lots of folks in youth development. They're like, man, every program just kind of needs to be shuttered and started over. And that's one idea. That's definitely one idea. But the root of moving towards liberation is that when we arm folks, again, with, with different tools, that folks will implement those tools, that our hearts really are in the right place in terms of wanting to do better, wanting to know better, and really want to be surrounded and be put in a situation where there's actually an opportunity to be accountable, which sort of leads us into our next piece, right? There's another but. Zara?
Yeah, so you know, many of us have probably participated in race equity or anti-racist trainings, and oftentimes, that really leaves programs with a sense of, okay, we've refined our analysis, or we're able to see things maybe in a different way, but doesn't necessarily have the next support steps. So that's really what we are looking to build in this cohort program is group support, implementation, accountability over a period of months, so that we're really building the collective capacity within your organizations to name and shift issues that are grounded in white supremacy. So we're really excited about this, about, yes, we want to provide the education, but the education for what, and what does that support and accountability look like longer term?
That's right. And most importantly, I would say in the space of equity trainings and anti-racism trainings, and that's my typo there at that last sentence there, and very few of these trainings and opportunities really address programs specifically working with not only young people, but young Black people. So when we're talking about the opportunity for us to add in, hopefully, what has been missing, right? So when we go to these trainings, hopefully for those that are on the line, it's not just about checking a box, but we're going with the intention of being able to walk away and be enlightened, and to go back into our spaces to actually implement and to take action on what we've learned. But again, in many instances, the opportunity for us to do that is not present. So again, really us building this to hopefully stand in the gap. And so our program design team was inspired by everything that we just sort of noted there. And especially inspired that, we always talk about, a lot of our adults, this is a different methodology. Some of us have written them off already. Like, man, you guys are too far gone. We don't believe that, but especially is the case as it pertains to our young people. So all of the work that has to go in, this collective unit of race equity practitioners and trainers, et cetera, said we've got to focus on programs that are working with our young people. If we're going to start anywhere, that's where we need to start. That's where we need to focus our energy. So again, inspired by trainings from BRJA and Undoing Racism, we came together and said, what would it look like if we put together a learning experience that, again, specifically focused on those youth serving organizations? So this collective consists of leaders from Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, Associated Black Charities, again, Zara representing both and, Positive School Center, Equity Matters, and Maryland Mentor really serving as the convener and really sort of facilitator for these conversations that are to come. We're really, really excited because part of my, my personal philosophy is that it's impossible to be a subject matter expert in everything. It's impossible, right, to be out front on everything. But what does it look like, especially in the context of Baltimore-based organizations, where we hear time and time again that our work is operating in silos? How do we knock down those silos and really build a culture of together? How do we build a culture of group accountability? And also, how do we build a culture of not just calling folks out, but calling folks in? And again, arming folks with the tools that are necessary to actually implement the change that we also desperately seek. So that was the idea of bringing together a group of leaders, right, to form an actual collective of folks that are passionate, have the experience, and really have the dedication to seeing this thing through. So our response, ladies and gentlemen, was to create the Moving Towards Liberation experience. And this is just a very, very general overview, a brief overview of some of the things that we're excited about featuring inside the Moving Towards Liberation experience. That is a cohort learning experience. This work doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like our individual programs don't just exist, right? Like with nothing else going on. So we thought that the cohort learning experience was particularly important, right? How do we learn from each other, right? How do we support each other during implementation challenges, right? So that cohort group learning experience we thought was really important. This is designed by a collective of youth development and race equity practitioners. So this is not just like one person's brainchild. There are a number of folks that have dedicated a significant, if not majority portion of their careers in this space, right? Helping us to tip the scales towards justice. This is all of what's going into this thing. This is an initial cohort. You know, we kind of shied away from using pilot, but again, in full transparency, this is the first time this particular collective has worked together. And this is the initial sort of launch cohort of Moving Towards Liberation. So we initially wanted to open that up to Baltimore-based youth serving organizations. But you know, I'm certainly open to discuss what is an audit sort of situation look like. You know, we have some of our friends from Philly that are on the line. There's a couple of other organizations that have reached out to me personally from other pockets around the state. But initially, we're focusing on Baltimore-based organizations initially. But also inside this cohort, we're going to be delving deep into tools and strategies for evaluating our programs and our respective organizations for liberation. Those are going to be a really, really big part of what we do. Also the technical assistance, so the actual implementation. How do we go about it? I think it was Jake who in the chat box mentioned this idea of involving boards, right? That is absolutely high up on our list, not only for executive leadership of the programs that would participate in this opportunity being present and being actively engaged, but also our boards of directors. How do we make sure that at every level of the organization, there is engagement and involvement in this process? Because again, our work doesn't happen in a vacuum. And then ultimately, how does all that trickle down to our young people? And again, making them active participants and sort of, you know, the designs and the implementations that will come out of this experience, but as well as families, because as we noted earlier, all too often our families and communities are seen as impediments to success and not resources to be mined for assets. But also there's a huge component of personal development that I don't want to get lost. This is not just about organization, but rather organizations we all know are collectives made up of people, right? I just read recently that, you know, the idea of objectivity is also a very, you know, it is not a very clear-cut concept in that this particular author defines, you know, objectivity is really collective subjectivity, right? And when we proceed with this idea that there's really no objectivity, but rather all collective subjectivity, if we're not growing personally and influencing our environment around us, then we don't have an opportunity to really, again, influence everything that's going on inside our organization. So that personal growth, just to bring the point home, is critical. We'll also be centering principles of equity, anti-racism, and youth liberation, which we're going to get to here in a moment. But also the idea of racial caucusing, right? Getting together groups of white people and groups of Black people to talk individually and specifically about the changes that that can be made and that need to be made in organizations, right? When we talk about the idea of undoing racism, it always beckons the question, right? Like, whose job is that? Whose job is that? So the idea of racial caucusing is really, really important. And then lastly, creating equity statements, ultimately equity statements and plans for the organizations that will participate, that'll hopefully be so thoughtful and so far reaching that they will eventually become parts of strategic plans, right? So we talk about guiding documents for organizations. Hopefully most organizations do have some sort of guiding framework for their work and their service and their goals and objectives. we posit that this conversation and the work that is to be done is every bit as important as any strategic plan. And more so, this is the lifeblood that flows through a strategic plan when we are thoughtful about this. So I'll pause here just for some reactions, any questions, comments. Zara, would you like to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to add to what you were saying about racial caucusing, just the importance of it. And I know that you mentioned racial caucusing for white people and for Black people, and that we would have racial caucusing for people of all races, and that it's really important to sort of process with people of similar racial background what is coming up for you, and that oftentimes those conversations can't happen authentically in a mixed race space. So there'd be racial caucusing and then coming back together in multiracial space to sort of report out, but just the importance of that as part of our ongoing learning.
That's right.
Yeah.
Any questions, comments so far from our participants? And we can absolutely unmute as well if anybody wants to raise their hand and actually speak. I can unmute you, or you're feel free to type a note or a question in the chat box, either to ourselves as panelists or to the entire group. So right now, Adelaide, there is no cost right now. We're in the process of still gaining some support from some local foundations, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. As a matter of fact, their names are on the flyer. But locally, T. Rowe Price Foundation, as well as the Deutsch Foundation, have been really leading the pack, I would say, locally here in Baltimore from a race equity standpoint, and immediately sort of saw the value in not only the collective approach, but this idea that youth serving organizations, we should really be prioritizing them for any sort of these conversations. So right now, once again, there is no cost for organizations to participate. Now that could change in the future, but as it stands for this initial cohort, for this first go round, there is no cost for organizations to participate.
So as a design team, come up with two objectives. And I would say that the first one is the vision and the second one is the how. So our Moving Towards Liberation cohort objectives are to dismantle white supremacy, racism, and white saviorism in youth programming. Now that's a very, very, very big look. And so we want to do that by creating a community of practitioners in youth development and mentoring that can spot problematic program practices and are armed to voice and correct these issues and hold each other accountable. This work happens in relationship with each other. It's not like there's a list of best practices that if we just do it and check those boxes, then we're done. And so we're really looking to create a community of practitioners that are on this journey together, so that we can dismantle white supremacy, racism, and white saviorism.
Thank you, Zara. So why liberation? Why liberation? Why this idea of liberation? So we had lots of conversations as a design team about what is the specific language that we wanted to sort of use to describe this experience. And we kept coming back to this idea of liberation. And I wanted to read for you all a passage that was actually referenced in the When Baltimore Awakes paper that was published by Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle and written by Davon Love, who was again part of our design team. But we really see liberation as the end goal of all race equity and anti-racism work. When we really think about it, right? This is a continuum, and liberation is at the end of that continuum. You know, so I wanted to read this passage for us as sort of part of that. So Jerome Schill, who's a Black social worker, an educator and scholar, is one of the leading sort of exponents and proponents of the African-centered perspective in social work. And taking the lead from Shield, he wrote some time ago that the Afrocentric paradigm of human services is particularistic in that it addresses the distinctive liberation needs of African people, and universalistic in that it fosters the spiritual and moral development of the world. So when we talk about holistic programs that are centered in liberation principles, they are just that, they are holistic, but from an African-centered perspective, not a Eurocentric worldview. Because again, many times in our programming, when we have our programming hats, right, all of our goals and objectives are coming through that Eurocentric lens with no real thought, or we're not armed with the tools to take as much consideration into what an African-centered worldview for our young Black participants looks like. And we have guiding work by sociologists, Black social workers that have studied and again, put together tools and paradigms and resources that are ready-made to be applied to our organizations. So this idea of liberation is one that is really a holistic approach. And that's really what we want to underscore here. Some additional pieces from the cohort, sort of the cohort design experience. So also, again, talking deeply about race equity auditing for our organization based on mentoring best practices. Because as Maryland Mentor, our core audience and constituency is mentoring programs or those organizations that have a mentoring component. So there are well-developed research and evidence-based mentoring best practices, but even those we want to ensure are run through a race equity audit for those organizations to ensure that the work we're doing is not injurious. But again, having deep conversations around how white supremacy shows up in our work. We already talked about the racial caucusing piece, but again, also the accountability partnership. So each organization that participates will have the opportunity to be paired with another organization. So again, we have some real life accountability partnership going on. But also analyzing internalized oppression and internalized white supremacy. Because one of the other pieces to note is that this isn't necessarily only about organizations that are white-led that serve majority Black youth, but there are also Black-led organizations, to be clear, that every bit need the conversations and need this process, because there's absolutely a such thing as, again, internalized oppression from the vantage point of Black people. So we want to make sure that all of those pieces are addressed via this experience. It will also be a combination of virtual and in-person convenings. And of course, under the cloud, hopefully only a figurative cloud. I have to try to keep things light, but hopefully just under a figurative cloud and not a literal cloud of COVID-19. There are still many things that are uncertain right now, but we certainly plan to not only host a kickoff convening in person, but also for us to be able to leverage technology and virtual convenings and sessions as well. And again, as Zara noted earlier, our long-term goal is to build a community of programs and practitioners with an accountability lens and who are armed with really a newfound perspective. There's also going to be the connection to the New Timbuktu Adult Education sort of a seminar series that is hosted by Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, which really represents a continuing education component. So even what happens at the end of this 9-month experience is that we don't want this to be a situation where everybody kind of just goes back to business as usual and to the status quo, but rather having that opportunity for ongoing education, communication, and partnership as we put this thing together. And then lastly, there's going to be analysis as well as suggested implementation of existing resources, plus a number of original pieces of content that were created specifically for the MTL experience, which we're super excited to share with you all about. All right, we got a yes. We got a yes from the congregation. All right, that means we onto something. We onto something. Uh, Zara, did you want to add in?
No, I'm just my heart was feeling very full hearing you talk about it. Just so many months of us having these conversations, and I'm excited to hear it all laid out. So
Awesome. And then Andre, Brother Andre asks, how does the racial equity audit get implemented and who facilitates the audit? Great question. It'll be a combination of the design team, Dre. So a combination of the design team as well as a group of consultants, the complete group of which has yet to be fully determined, but there are a number of consultants that we've already been in conversations with who will definitely be aiding in conducting those audits. And then the implementation, that comes back to the planning, which is going to be a part of the entire cohort experience, right? Is making sure that there is a realistic plan to implement the findings of the audit, because we all know, like, we don't want this to be an exercise in futility where we just conduct a bunch of things and write a bunch of reports and everything stays the same. That is the exact opposite of the spirit with which we want this process to proceed. We don't just want, again, one of those strategic plans that just sits on a shelf and collects dust, but rather one that is continually pulled out, examined, and put into action. Again, rinse and repeat. So moving on, as we head towards conclusion, here, ladies and gentlemen, are some of the resources that we'll be pulling from. And again, I want to emphasize that this is some of the resources that we'll be pulling from. I also recommend that if anyone on the line has not read these particular pieces of work, that man, what a great head start, regardless of what happens and whether or not everybody in the line will be full participants in the initial cohort of moving towards liberation. But man, these are an excellent head start. You can consider it pre-work, you can consider it as part of that first investment. But these pieces of work, especially when Baltimore Awakes, as really a holistic analysis of the human and social services sector in Baltimore, with, again, far-reaching implications across the country, is a huge part because of the analysis of white supremacy and how it shows up in youth-serving organizations especially, is a huge part of the foundation of moving towards liberation. And then how to be an anti-racist, again, gives very specific language and analysis around, again, how our work shows up on behalf of young people. And again, there is a very intentional emphasis on those organizations and programs that work with and support and service of young people. And then lastly, critical mentoring, who we absolutely expect Dr. Tori Wieston-Surdan to be one of our guest facilitators. So that's one of the secrets that only you all on this info session are privy to, but she has written a masterful and, again, very practical guide on really the intersection of critical race theory and mentoring, right? Which we know historically was not designed with Black youth in mind, which is a very common misnomer. But critical mentoring is, again, a very practical guide. I've already been in conversations with Dr. Tori around her involvement, and you know, she was very excited. And again, these are some of the resources. So I'll pause there. Let me see. There was a note in the chat box. Yes. We appreciate that. So the comment is really just around the thoughtfulness and the richness of the offering for us doing this work. And she's immediately kind of seeing how this can add some depth and breadth to the work. So I'm really excited to hear that. I really appreciate that. And then Jake has a couple of questions. So 2 quick questions. How many people from an organization can participate? Great question. Number 2, do you have any document that overviews the overall scope and time commitment? Also great question. So yes, yeah, so let me answer the first one. So the first question is that for this initial cohort, we're looking for somewhere between 10 and 15 organizations to participate, with a cap of around 3 individuals per organization would be ideally how we look at that. Um, so again, we're thinking this initial kind of cohort group will be between like 30 and 40 folks, but again, really representing 10 to 15 different organizations, which really allows for the formation of a brain trust inside those organizations, which really kind of takes us back to slide, 3 or 4, when we talk about some of the limitations many times for other sort of race equity endeavors, is that many times, just like one person from an organization going to quote unquote, right, represent for the rest of the organization. And then that person sort of comes back and they're immediately sort of put into Tupac land, right? Me against the world, and are expected to sort of put something in place with zero support financially, zero support internally from the organization, zero support from the board. So really the idea of really ideally probably 3, Jake. So that way, again, there is a formation of a brain trust, and right away there's some sort of coalition of the willing inside of an organization. On the scope document, Jake, we'll get something put together and sent out to you ASAP. It's a great question.
Sadiq, can I add to how many people?
Please.
You'll see on the application that it's really critical to have the executive director of the organization or sort of an equivalent person as part of this process. Because, just to tack on to what Sadiq said about, coming back in and feeling like, if you were sent to a training and feeling like you then need to communicate it all out, we are finding more and more that having the leaders of organizations involved in this process in the day-to-day sort of education and learning and shifting is critical. So that will be a requirement.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments before we move towards conclusion? Let me make sure there's somebody else raise their hand. Hold on. We're getting the hang of this facilitation piece. Good old Zoom. Zoom stock is through the roof, I understand. All right. So this is a very, very loose sort of projected timeline right now, because again, there's a great deal of uncertainty, particularly around our kickoff summit, which is really the where the rubber meets the road in terms of laying the groundwork and the foundation for what's to come over the subsequent 9 months of participation. But the cohort application actually opened up last week, and we've already gotten a couple of those applications in, which is super exciting. And then today, obviously, we're conducting our first info session, followed by next week on Wednesday, we'll do info session number 2, followed by the closing of the application. Right now, because to Jake's point, the necessity to have these conversations ahead of time in order to garner some board support, we're looking at extending that application to at least the 13th, just to allow some of those conversations to happen. And again, just amidst all of the different shifts and work that's happening, with everyone or with so many folks, definitely not everyone, but with so many folks teleworking, and us wanting to be respectful of that fact. So again, I'm looking at extending that deadline. By April 27th, we look at notifying MTL applicants on status, and those organizations that are selected will absolutely sort of be part of a process internally designed by the design team in order for us to essentially select and have some additional conversations with those folks that apply in order for us to arrive at who is selected for participation. And then at the beginning of May, we're going to be looking at announcing those organizations who are a part of this initial experience. Followed by mid-May, these are the tentative dates right now for our kickoff summit, which is again, really intended to lay the groundwork and the foundation for what's to come, but in and of itself be a really, really powerful experience that we think has also been really, really thoughtfully put together. So I am like super excited to be able to share that with participants. We look to June to actually kick off our initial sessions and sort of, again, partly begin the groundwork for the racial caucusing. Also, the MTL, sort of executive director only. So to Zara's point, being thoughtful around how we can encourage and sort of drive change inside organizations. And we know, just based on the majority of organizations that we sort of deal with on a day-to-day basis, culture runs from the top down. Culture runs from the top down. And in order to be serious about implementation and change, we have to have leadership at the highest levels involved in this process, or else, not that it won't get done, but in many cases, it's an uphill battle. And then in the other cases, it doesn't happen. And then in July, we begin pairing organizations as accountability partner. And then we get into some more of the nitty gritty between July and January. We know that's a bit kind of like open-ended in there, but we look to conclude the entire process in January of 2021. We don't want to give away everything right now in terms of exactly what each one of the sessions look like, and some of the other design sort of features, if you will. But again, this is a projected timeline right now, which again still stands to be adjusted just based on things that we don't know right now. Last thing to note on this projected timeline is that it was important for us to go ahead and get the word out and start really promoting the idea and opening this up for applications, because again, we know that this is really, really important, and we just simply didn't want to delay it. Let me see, did anybody else from our design team join us? I want to be able to open it up to our design team for a little bit as well. Going back here, design team. Let me see here. Give me 1 second. Let me just make sure that I didn't miss anybody. Design team. Okay, we're gonna keep moving. All right, let's see here. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, next steps. Consider, again, to Jake's question and to Zara's response, who additionally from your organization will participate outside of the executive director or board chair? And the MTL Summit is a full 2-day commitment. Yeah, great question. The MTL Kickoff Summit is a full 2-day commitment. Absolutely. We're looking at 9 to 4 on both of those days. And those are the tentative projected dates, but my alma mater, Morgan State University, the beautiful, illustrious Morgan State University. If you guys just look at the colors here, these are Morgan State colors on the slides too, just as an FYI. But my alma mater, unfortunately, just postponed and officially announced a postponement of commencement, which I can't recall when the commencement was ever postponed. So again, I just bring that up. Our objective is to host that kickoff summit, literally as the kickoff activity for the entire experience. But it's absolutely subject to change right now. We just simply don't know. But we just want to end with this, just in terms of being clear on what is at stake for you and your organization if you participate, and if you don't participate, if you don't take action, right? Because we know that there's a cost for taking action, but there's also a cost of inaction. And we want you all to be considering exactly what that is. Please go ahead and complete the application, even if you're not 100% sure right now. We encourage you to go ahead and get your application in, which again was designed to really be a thoughtful exercise. So it's not, hopefully it doesn't come across as sort of like a typical application. You know, there's not any questions on there that are like busy work or, you know, but we really wanted to sort of get a strong sense for the thoughts of the leadership of organization and where folks are intended to go. Yeah, great question, Sharon. The application would be submitted by one organization, because there is a spot in the application where you would list out roles and names for those folks that would be potential additional participants. Great question. complete the application. That can be found right at bit.ly, MTL 2020 app. And Jake, application will be due sometime between April 6th and April 13th. We prefer sooner than later, but we've just gone ahead and essentially extended the application deadline just in light of everything that everybody has going on, but no later than April the 13th. Yeah, also great question. As long, Jake, as one of the three is the executive director, then the other two doesn't necessarily, I would say, have to be set in stone right now. Great question. No, it should be more than one, ideally three. But we don't want we don't want folks to be participating in this process as solo practitioners. That's what we don't want to happen. But please reach out with any additional questions, comments, and feel free to share the opportunity with others. Feel free to share this opportunity with others. And what questions do folks have? And lastly, I want to make sure, please, as folks are typing those questions, we want to shout out, again, those initial design supporters who have seen the vision and who are really leading, I would say, in Baltimore from the philanthropic space, or two of the leaders, I should say, in the philanthropic space, as it pertains to race equity and having tough conversations, not just tough conversations for the sake of having them, but tough conversations that lead someplace. I want to be able to shout out T. Rowe Price Foundation, as well as the Robert W. Deutsch Foundation for really them believing in this initial experience. We will share out this PowerPoint, absolutely. We'll send that out to participants who have registered, absolutely. So ladies and gentlemen, last 2 minutes for questions, comments, or thoughts. Look at that, we're right at time. Questions, comments. How are you all feeling? Is this something that you all are excited about? Is this something that we're gonna share out? Get those applications in? I just wanna make sure. Zara, closing thoughts.
I just want to thank everybody for being here. And like Sadiq said, please reach out if you have questions or you're thinking of, how to frame this within your organization. You're wondering who should be involved. Like, we're here to answer those. Really, really excited to be in community with all of you. So thank you.
All right, everybody. Peace and blessings. Please stay safe. We'll stick around for another minute, maybe a minute or so after 12, just in case there's any other questions or comments. But we, once again, really appreciate everybody's time. This is a really kooky time. I'm locked in my office right now. My kids are running around, hopefully not like, beating each other up too badly. But I know everybody else sort of shares that sentiment. So peace and blessings to all. Like I said, I'll stick around for another couple of moments if there's any other questions or comments. All right, ladies and gentlemen, any other questions or comments? Anybody else wanted to share anything before we sign off?